This video will be about making some different character models using some of the modeling techniques that we have already looked at. Obviously there's lots of different types of characters that you could make. It's important to think about how you want your character to look before you begin modeling. Ideally you'd have some sort of drawing or a plan in mind. You might want them to look very realistic, in which case it'll take a long time to model and it will be more challenging. But you might prefer them to look cartoon, in which case, modeling tends to be simpler. It all depends on what you're after. But in this video, we're going to make some relatively simple models, and hopefully that'll be a good way for you to get started. And if you want to make them more detailed, then at least you've got something there to begin with. I'm going to have a go at doing a couple of different types of models. One which is essentially humanoid and has, arms and legs and a head. All in the right places. And I think the second one will be what I'm going to call a kind of Mr. Man. If you think of the Roger Hargreaves Mr. Men and Little Miss books, where they've got a sort of a shape for a body, whether it's an oval or a square or whatever, and then their arms and legs kind of stick out the side. Obviously there are lots of characters like this, so it might be a useful technique for some of you. First we're going to make a humanoid, and we're going to start with this default cube here. The first thing to do is resize this cube, and I'm going to use this cube as the torso. So the main bit of the body without the arms and legs. So first we need to make it the right sort of size for a torso. Think about people you've looked at, think about your own bodies, and you can scale this cube in different directions to get that right shape. So I'm going to scale it up first, so it's S and then Z. Something like that. I'm going to make it a little broader in the Y-axis, so S and then Y, just scale it in the Y-axis. And I think that's fine. So just going for a really rough shape. The next thing to do is give this a head. And so for that, I need to edit this shape. And to do that, I need to go into edit mode. Up here, I can choose edit mode, or you can press the tab key on the keyboard. And to make the head, I'm going to use this face select option. Select the top face here. Having selected the face, I'm going to inset it a little. So press I and just bring it in a little like that. I'm going to shape this into the neck, so think about the width and the depth of the neck. So S and then Y, I'm just going to bring it in like that, square it off a little, and then by pressing E I can extrude it upwards a little way to make the neck. I can press E again to extrude it up to kind of where the chin would be, and then press S to scale that up to the right sort of width and depth for a head compared to the body. You might do it in different proportions. Perhaps your character's got an oversized head or a tiny little head. And then I'm going to press E like that to get the right sort of size to the head, and then perhaps just scale it in a little bit to help it round off at the top. The next thing I'm going to do is make a cut around this torso area, around these edges, and use it to make a face here to extrude an arm out of. To do that, I'm going to press Ctrl and R and hover over this vertical line, and then so I've made my loop cut, and I'm just going to slide it into place like that. And so with that second click, I've placed that edge or set of edges around there, which means that I can go to face select and choose this one here, and then again press E, and I can just come right out to the length of the arm. Again, think about the proportions of your character. As I said, we're making this very simple at this stage, and we can add more detail later when we've got our kind of basic mesh sorted out. The next thing we need then obviously are some legs. So the next thing we need is a leg, but before we do that I'm going to use a mirror. This will mean that I can do things on one half of the character and they will be mirrored on the other side. To make a mirror work, we need to chop what we've got here down the middle. So again, I'm going to use loop cut and slide, Ctrl and R, and hover over one of these horizontal lines to get a preview cut that runs vertically through the torso and the head. Then I'll click and click once more to leave that line right there. I then need to remove these faces, otherwise they will mess up the mirror and it will look weird. To do that, I'm going to turn on X-ray mode so that I can see through the object. I'm going to use face select, and you can see these little black dots appear on the faces. And I'm also going to just rotate myself or orbit around my object until I've got like a good view here. If you need help, just press the X on there, and it'll give you a decent view from a particular angle. The reason I've chosen this view is so that now I can click and drag over the faces I want to delete, making sure that I get all the little black dots within this box that I've made, like that, and that's selected half of them. Okay, so that's what we're after. Just to double check that you've got the faces you think you've got, just have a little look around and check, and that's what we're happy with. If you go wrong, just double tap A and have another go. Okay. Once you've selected the faces you want to remove, press X and then choose Faces. I can now turn off X-ray mode and come back over here to the modifier panel, this little blue spanner. The modifier I'm going to add is called Mirror, like that, and while it initially doesn't seem to do anything, the reason is that it's being mirrored in the wrong axis. At the moment it's being mirrored in the X-axis, we want it mirrored in the Y-axis. So I'm going to turn this off and turn that on. There we go. And you'll see any changes we make here are replicated or mirrored on the other side. Now for the leg. Because we may want to rig our character, it's a good idea to keep the legs slightly apart and not too close together. So doing that, it will make it very hard to rig. However, if we use the edge select here and just try our best to get this edge here. So you can see I've selected that. Now I'm going to move it down ever so slightly. G, then Z. Move it down just to create a little angle like that. Back to face select. Click on the face, and this time if I press E, you'll see that the legs now come out at a relatively shallow angle. You know, we don't want our character doing the splits or anything like that. So we have our very basic humanoid mesh. Now, if you're going for a very blocky look, this might be perfect for you, and you can add more detail now by perhaps pressing Ctrl and R and making some cuts. And you can try scaling by pressing S or G and Y to move it to get sort of different body shapes from your character. We can also, you know, move these up and down if you wanted to, you know, make wings or something like that. Likewise with the legs, you know, we could add a cut to make a knee. So I'll scale that inwards and just perhaps push it forwards slightly, so G and then X, you know, and so we can get that kind of shape. I'll undo that as well. To make some hands come out of here, again, we can just select the face and just think about, you know, how wide the hand is in comparison to the arm. So the first thing I could do is extrude it slightly and then scale it down to make a sort of wrist shape. Extrude again. There's the wrist coming out of the sleeve. We're going to extrude again, but just a short way like that, and this will help us make a thumb here using this face. So I'm just going to press E there and bring that thumb out. Then I can carry on with the rest of the hand like that. And of course, you know, you can scale it in different axes. So if I scale it in the Z axis like that, look, I can kind of make it thinner towards the fingers. Again, this is a very, very simplified model that you can then add more detail to. And don't forget, a lot of detail is added in texturing. So things like, you know, skin textures and scars and all that sort of stuff is often done with pictures rather than actually modelling it. Feet, you can do very much the same thing as the hands. So I've selected this face down here, and I'm going to press E like that, and perhaps scale that in a little bit just to make the bottom of the trousers, and then E once more like that. That, what I've imagined this is the sort of ankle to the heel, and then here I can bring out the toes. Again, I can change the scale of this. If I press G and Z rather, I'll move that edge. So I've selected the edge and I'm just moving it downwards to create a better shape for the foot. It's still very simple, but it is going to give us a better looking foot. To make this look more natural, we have the option of adding the Subdivision surface modifier, and you'll find that in this second column just here. You'll see immediately that the model becomes more rounded and just that bit more realistic. However, we can also see that some of those well-defined areas, like our cuffs and the armpits and things like that, are now less defined. And this is where we can get our loop cut and slide out again. So if I press Ctrl and R and go to the arm here, I can bring that into the armpit just to kind of make that corner sharper instead of smoother. I can do it around the body as well if I wanted to do that. And again, perhaps around the elbows and the knees. So I could do something like that and scale that in. You can see that just gives quite a nice shape to the arm. And the knees, Control and R. And if I just scale that in a little and then press G and X to just shove it forward slightly, it gives a more natural kind of stance. We could also modify the kind of width of our character. If I press Control and R and then loop, cut and slide around the middle and then press S and X, you'll see that I can make them fatter or thinner. There may be other details you want to add. Perhaps you want to grab this edge and this one here. And if I press G and X, I can puff out the chest or whatever. And likewise with the head, we can add in more loop cuts to perhaps, round off or square out the head. We could grab this edge here, for example, G and X, and move that out to make a sort of chin. And potentially grab this edge here, G and X, and push that out to make a bum. So we're just going for that more human-looking pose. And so with a few cuts, you can make some really significant changes. And then even from there, you could go into sort of further detail. Perhaps your character wears a hat. We can add some edges here, like that perhaps. And then some more like that. And what I've done there is made several faces around it, and I can switch to face selector and grab those. If we press E at this point and extrude these, it doesn't make for a very good hat. However, if I undo that and I try this instead, press E and then enter to say, okay, I've extruded those, but actually at the moment we have to be careful because the faces we've just extruded are in the same place as the faces that we had originally, and this can cause issues. So it's important to be aware of when you've extruded a bit of your mesh. Now, if I press S and Shift and Z, that will stop it from scaling in the Z axis, and I can move them all out like that to get the general rim of the hat. So you'll notice that having done that, there's a sort of split in the mesh here. That's because when we extrude it, it actually creates little faces just here. If I go into object mode, you might be able to see it a little more clearly. And I'll just take the subdivision surface modifier off. You can click this to turn it off in the viewport to get an idea of what it looked like before. It's not showing us very well. Nevertheless, what we do in edit mode, so up in edit mode, choose face select. I'm just going to click that face there and press X. It has given us another problem, but we'll come to that in a second. I'll choose the same one on the other side. That's not the right one. That is. X and then faces. And finally, just select the edges at the very ends of the hat. And press G and Y to kind of push them back to the center point until they look correct. And then we've got a basic hat shape which you could perhaps do some more stuff with. So I could move that up perhaps like that. I can still grab these edges. You do have to be careful about which edges you select and move, so think about it before you do it. G and Y, and then I can make that brim wider. If there's a rounded element on our character and we want it a bit more squared off, we can just add more edges, Control and R, and there we are. So now it's more like a top hat. Hopefully with these techniques then you will be able to have a go at making your own humanoid character. There'll be another video that you can watch to help you put some materials on it and give them some colour and some clothes. One final thing you can do, you'll notice that your model is probably looking quite faceted. We can see all the faces on it. What you can do is go into object mode, and here in the object menu just click Shade Smooth. If you find that when you add the smooth shading that you've got any little holes. You can see one here in the hat, perhaps there's some down here. It normally is where the mirror is not joining up correctly. So in the mirror modifier here, you can alter this value here, the merge limit. So you can either click the little arrow on the right hand side just to notch it up by very small amounts, or you can click on the number and start to drag to the right. And you can see that eventually it will fill in that hole. Try not to go too far, otherwise you will find that your model does unexpected things. And we can have another little look around, just check that that hasn't had any adverse side effects. Good. At this point, we could come down here into the subdivision surface and try smoothing it further. Don't go too high, you will probably crash your computer. But you can see 3 is looking very smooth indeed. Okay, this character's ready for some materials. Obviously you can further refine yours, but that's as far as I'm going to go with this one. So next we're going to look at what I'm calling a Mr. Man. I've started with a new file here. These characters are typically simple shapes. Here's a cube that would be an excellent starting point, but equally you could manipulate your cube into a different shape. For example, a triangle would be easy, S and then Y, something like that. Then of course you can scale that, S and X, if you wanted to make something, for example, a sandwich as your character. It could easily be made into a sphere. I'll just undo all that. If I choose the modifier settings, I can add a subdivision surface modifier, knock that up a little bit and scale that up. And you can see that we've got these faces all around it that we'd be able to make arms and legs out of. Just for the moment, I'll remove that modifier. So there's a few different options that you can go for, but the principle is always the same. We have the basic shape, and we're going to make some arms and legs come out of the side and the bottom. Okay, I'm going to keep mine as a cube to keep it simple. So you might have to adjust, some of the faces where the arms are. To begin, I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to press Ctrl and R, and I'm going to cut this cube in half by hovering over one of these horizontal lines, clicking once, clicking twice, and then if I get myself in a nice side view like this, so I'm going to press the X button on here, I will press the X-ray mode so I can see through these faces, face select, and then I'm going to click and drag over this half here. Make sure I've got all the faces I think I've got. Good. And then press X and faces. This means that I can now apply the mirror modifier and change its axis from X to Y. This means that I can now model on this side and it duplicates it on that side for me. So the next thing is to make the arm, and I'm just going to turn off X-ray mode so that I can see what I'm doing a bit more easily. And with face select mode still on, I'm going to choose this face here. I'm going to press I and inset a face. At this point, depending on your shape, you might need to scale it in the X or Y axis, or perhaps even move it up and down, so G and then Z or X and Y if that's better for you. So you can have arms coming up out here or maybe down here. So I think Mr. Men tend to be sort of here, don't they? Then I'm going to press E and extrude that out for the length that I think the arm should be. These are obviously very cartoonish characters, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to help the arm get a better shape by pressing S and just narrowing it down to the wrist like that. I can now bring out a little hand, what I call a mitten hand, where we just have a wrist, and then if we make this bit a little wider, so I've just extruded that, extrude this one, and then S and X, something like that. I can now have a little thumb come out of here by clicking that face and pressing E, and perhaps just scale that down a bit, so pressing S and just drawing that in, and then E and S. We've got a very simple little hand there for our character. The leg is essentially the same, except obviously from a different face. I'll select this face here, I to inset, and you'll see now that because the face is not square, the inset isn't square, and so we do need to scale this in the different axes. So first S and then X to bring that in like that. So I made it roughly square, and then I'm just going to press S because now I can scale it more uniformly, and I'll go with something like that. And just the same as before, E, down to the ankles. If I then press S to bring them in, E down to the kind of bottom of the foot or the heel, and then I can click on this face here, press E and bring out the toes. I can shape this a little better, so now I'm going to switch to edge mode and just give the feet a little bit of a tweaking. So clicking this edge here at the front, at the sort of top of the toes if you like, and then press G and Z. There we go. And then at the back here I'm just going to press this very bottom one at the heel and press G and X. Okay. If you're stuck which direction to move things in, you just refer to this and pay attention to the coloured lines that run through the grid on the document. Okay, if you're happy with the size of it, great. If not, we can move these things around. If I want to move make the legs longer, I could use vertex selection. So that I get all of the vertices that I need, I'll turn X-ray mode on and then just click and drag a box over them. By pressing G and Z now I can make that leg much longer or shorter, and then I'll turn X-ray mode off. And I've gone into object mode. I've just pressed tab to go into object mode to have a little look how it looks. And that's great, but what if we wanted these arms and legs to look a little bit more natural? In the Mr. Men books, they've got quite rounded arms and legs and less robotic than this. What we would do is add a subdivision surface modifier. However, when I add it, you'll see that now my shape looks a little different. It's not quite so cubed anymore. But that's all right. We have got these rounded arms and leg, but we can do something about the overall shape. What we do is we go into edit mode, and it shows us our original cage, which is really useful because it means I can select edges that I want to be sharper and less curved. So what I need to do is select the edges that make up the kind of silhouette, if you like, of my object. So because mine is a cube, I'm going to get these 4 edges around here, which will create a sharper side of the cube. These 2 up here, which will create a sharp top. And finally, these 2, which will sharpen up these faces here and here. Notice that we haven't chosen any edges around here, or these ones. We don't need a kind of sharp middle. And we wanted the arms and legs to be rounder, so we're not going to sharpen up any of those. I'm saying sharpen, actually the term is crease, and to do it we go, once we've selected the edges we want to crease, we choose edge and then edge crease. Having chosen that, we then drag our mouse to the right, and you should notice that as you do that it sharpens up those corners, and you can kind of do it to varying degrees. So if you did want a sort of slightly rounded model, then you could leave it somewhere in between. But I want it completely sharp, so I'm going to go all the way to the right. You'll also see once you click and set your edge crease that it actually gives you a little dialog window down in the bottom left here, and you still have access to that until you do something else. You can see that as a result of the smoothing, these arms now look kind of strange, and so I can add some more edges just to try and change the shape of that. If I press Ctrl and R to make a loop cut and hover over one of these diagonal edges, you can only just see them, but there they are, coming from this corner inwards to the arm. You can see though where my preview line is, and if I click you can see the result, and then I can slide that inwards just to really sharpen up that area there. So I'm going to go with something like that, and I'm going to do the same with the legs. Ctrl and R, try and just hover my mouse where I can think that edge is until I get the preview line I want. Click like that, and then just slide it in towards where the legs come out. As well as that, I can just add a bit more shape to the feet. You can see that they've got sort of very curved, they kind of look like stockings. If I press Ctrl and R and do a cut around the leg and bring that down, Ctrl and R and just bring that in like that. Another thing you might want to do is just go around the foot and flatten the foot out. If I press Control and R and go around here like that, you can see it just creates a nice flat foot. We could go and add some edges here. So I just double click that edge cut in there, edge loop in there, and I can, you know, resize the arms. Perhaps I want them to be muscular, and I can move that up and down. If I press G and Y, I can move that along to create the shape that I'm after. Likewise with the legs, Control and R, and if I press G and X, sorry, I can move them forwards just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of a more natural pose. Normally, to get rid of these faceted features, where we can see all the faces, we would choose Object and then Shade Smooth. Obviously, this has a sort of undesirable impact on the squared off parts. It loses that definition around the corners. So, having done this smoothing on the whole object, if we go back into edit mode, we can choose Face Select, and again, just taking your time, select the faces that make up, or that we want to be shaded flat. So the ones that make up the cubed bit, or whatever shape you've chosen yours to be. And that one there. Yeah. Okay. I can now choose Mesh and choose Shading and Flat Faces. So now what we'll see, if I go into object mode, that these are flat and well defined, whereas the arms and legs are smooth and more natural. And that is a useful way to create these kind of Mr. Man type characters. And of course we can add more detail when we come to texture this, which I will cover in a separate video.